I feel like I have boogers hanging out of my nose.
So I just saw Suspiria last night at the Cinerama Dome, and I've got some thoughts. Overall, I think it's a good movie, but I didn't like it. I'm really upset that I'm saying this because I really wanted to like it, and after I saw it, I still want to like it, but I'm super conflicted, to be honest. Suspiria 2018 is yet another 2018 remake of a classic horror film. One of my favorites, Suspiria from 1977, I think. It's obvious that the director of the new Suspiria wanted to distance his film from the original. A lot of the most well-remembered aspects of the original, the color palette, over-the-top crazy psychedelic nature, the soundtrack. It seems like they purposely went in a much different direction as opposed to, say, the new Halloween movie this year that seems to want to celebrate everything that was great about the John Carpenter original and, in my opinion, succeeds. I really admire the fact that the new Suspiria takes the basic premise of the original and goes in a completely new direction with it. I like that. I also like the fact that the new film feels like a singular vision. It's obvious that the director had a very clear and cohesive idea of what he wanted to achieve with this new film, and I really appreciate when any artist does that. But that unfortunately doesn't necessarily mean that I personally connect with that vision. You can see why I'm a bit conflicted. While I respect, enjoy, appreciate an artist doing that more than succeeding monumentally at repeating something that's worked before, I found that the new Suspiria really left me cold. And while I think that its intention was to leave the viewer cold, I don't think that I was left feeling that way in the way the movie intended. I'm a guy that really likes a sloppy zoom. I liked it in Kung Fu films, 70s movies, House of the Devil, one of my favorite movies. And in this movie, there's some great cinematography. I like the color palette. I like the grainy, desaturated quality. I like the shot choices. There's a dialogue scene between Madame Blanc and Susie that feels super reminiscent, like a homage almost to a scene from Psycho with Norman Bates talking to Marion Crane. There's one split diopter shot, which I'm a sucker for. I love it all the time. It reminds me of Brian De Palma films, the Mike Flanagan Ouija movie, which is awesome, I think. Sorry, not sorry. I like the purposely sloppy, disjointed editing. It creates a weird sense that time is flowing in an unusual way and that maybe what we're seeing isn't necessarily to be completely believed. There were a lot of scenes that could have played in a lesser director's hands, like maybe, I don't know, Darren Aronofsky, in a super conventional way. this isn't Black Swan. There's a scene where a character is looking into a mirror at one point, and I thought, of course, the reflection's going to come to life and do something creepy. That didn't happen. Great job. Other things happen that maybe you don't expect so much. Overall, I think, in general, the movie kind of goes where you're expecting it to go, especially if you've seen a lot of horror movies, and especially if you've seen the original Suspiria. But moment to moment, I think that there are some surprises and that a lot of expectations are averted. I think the acting is uniformly sound. I'm surprised that I actually like Dakota Johnson for once. Wow, okay. Tilda Swinton is so good. The score, I have to say it, not a big Radiohead fan. Not a big Tom York fan either. Also not really a big fan of this score, sorry. I think that this movie would have benefited hugely, at least in my enjoyment, from a better score. Something more atmospheric, something stranger. It actually really took me out of the movie when Tom York's voice popped in a couple times. They would have been better off, in my opinion, with some sort of strange Penderecki or Philip Glass score, or maybe something more along the lines of what Goblin did, honestly, even with everything being so different aesthetically with the new film. In fact, there's a trailer online that I saw where somebody did put the music from the original film by Goblin over the footage from the trailer of the new Suspiria, and I think it's rad. So, without getting into specific spoilers, the movie certainly builds to a sort of surprisingly emotional climax. That sort of worked for me, sort of didn't. One of the reasons is, again, another bit of breaking the immersion I had with the film. Tilda Swinton, this is no secret, and it's not a spoiler, plays multiple characters in the film. She plays the character that she's billed to be playing. She also plays two characters that I won't name here, but I knew going in what at least one of them was going to be, and it made the final emotional crux of the thing not really land for me. It felt a little arch and silly, which really bothered me, and I couldn't quite achieve the feeling that I think the director intended, whereas with something like The Haunting of Hill House goes for kind of a similar tug on the heartstrings kind of ending. That really landed for me. This kind of didn't. I really like the perverse decision that I think led to that casting choice. I think it's really funny and I think it's creative and interesting, but I think that maybe it wasn't the right fit for the material. So the day that I saw this movie, I went to watch the new Halloween for a second time with my parents this time, and loved it again, just like the first time. When I went to see the new Suspiria, it was at the ArcLight, presented by Beyond Fest, and a very nice gentleman gave a speech to introduce the film. His speech kind of put me in maybe the wrong frame of mind to some degree for watching this movie, I think. The gist of it, at least to me, was this movie is amazing. There was a screening earlier today where people were sitting in hushed, stunned silence and just in awe of the filmmaking on display. It's very beautiful. It's super profound. This is certainly my favorite film of the year. They gave it a standing ovation, and I hope you enjoy it as well. His speech kind of put me off a little bit because it felt like a little bit of a lecture. It kind of felt like, to me, he was saying, if you don't love this movie as much as I do, you're an idiot. And I don't really like that sort of pretentious academic kind of film geek bullshit, even though I'm sure I'm guilty of that as well, but of course, we all like the smell of our own farts, not so much other people's. Having said that, kind of put me off a little bit. Then the movie started. He set the bar really high. Immediately turned off by Tom York's voice. I was like, really don't like this. Really taking me out of the film. That's okay. Let's keep going. As the movie moves into its psychedelic third act, I started to feel like this is a film that is pitching itself as a film in league with the films of Jodorowsky, David Lynch, 70s freak out, Ken Russell, The Devils, Altered States, those type of movies. And that was also a problem for me because I thought that it didn't quite go far enough in that direction as, say, something like Mandy maybe would have and did. It wasn't wigged out and trippy enough for it to really feel like the experience I think that they thought it was. I would even say The Lords of Salem did it better as far as crazy, abstract, quick cut, freak out, Kubrick style strangeness goes. I honestly think the biggest thing for me by the time the movie was over that bothered me about it was its feeling of self-importance. It felt super ponderous. It felt like it was intentionally trying to be a B movie with A levels, but wasn't really knocking it out of the park with the B movie or the A levels. It felt like an academic exercise, so the setup by the guy introducing the film really was appropriate. It felt very didactic, and as a person who loves a good slow burn more than most people do, I think I actually felt the length of this film. It's 2.5 hours or so, and it felt a little bit long to me. And I honestly can't think of another movie in years I've said that about. I love a long movie. I thought Blade Runner 2049 could have gone on for another hour. I would have loved it. I do think it has a better story than the original Suspiria. I think that it's really great to see a director do something that he wants to do that doesn't seem compromised in any way, any molestation of his singular vision whatsoever. Super into that. Just didn't really connect with me. Maybe part of it is that I saw Halloween again the same day. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe it was the guy's speech before the movie. Maybe it was both. Seeing Halloween earlier in the day, I left feeling really inspired. I started working on a script for something that I had talked about doing and haven't done in the last few months, but I'm back to working on it again. I was in a really good mood. I felt really energized by the idea of cinema, of shooting and editing and music and sound design and how all these things come together to create an atmosphere. And Suspiria kind of made me feel the opposite way. It felt like it kind of sucked the wind out of me. And I'm sure that that's sort of the point, but it almost felt like a waste of time. Like instead of seeing Suspiria, I should have just seen Halloween that day, gone home and worked on my own creative project with the inspiration that that movie gave me. I don't know. So that's my review of Suspiria, slapped together the day after. It's coming out soon. I suggest you see it. I think even if you don't like it, it's worth seeing and paying for because I like the idea of supporting people that are really doing their own thing, which I think Suspiria is a movie like that. I think that the director should be rewarded for not just repeating what he thinks other people want to see from a Suspiria film, not catering to some perceived notion of what is entertaining, popular, trendy, or expected. Thanks for watching. Never done anything like this before, talking to the camera. I'll probably hate editing it. I hope you like watching it. If not, you can suck my butt, and see you next time, if there's a next time. Thanks.
I'm Kirsten. Whitney asked me to give my take on Suspiria because we had very different ideas about the film, and it was really interesting talking about it last night. because I'm coming from a background as a professional dancer, and so I kind of saw Suspiria playing out like a story ballet and a fairy tale. So I didn't have any emotional connection to it, which was really interesting because generally I'm kind of a crier. I really felt like it was allegorical in the way that folk tales are. I felt like Suspiria was an amazingly beautiful film that really did bring me into another world. There was a kind of rhythm to how the story plays out that reminds me a lot of the classical ballets. There is in Suspiria the knowledge of the Lufthansa hostages in the 70s, but to me that was really more of a representation of time versus any kind of influence on what was going on in the story. And it is really interesting how they use that because it feels like the time period is years, but in actuality, at one point, this is gonna be a spoiler, so I'm probably gonna go into spoilers now. So if you don't wanna hear spoilers, then click the time code below. Okay, 3, 2, 1. You realize at a certain point that it's only been 5 days, and it seems like years have passed since the beginning of the film. And that was a really jarring moment for me. And story ballets are like that. Time compressing and expanding in the story was really interesting. I was struck by a couple of scenes. The first one is when the Dakota Johnson's character, Susie, she dances the lead in a ballet that Tilda Swinton's character has created called Folk. And she dances that part for the first time, her first day at this academy. And as she's dancing, there's a character whose name is Olga. She gets led into another dance studio that's a hall full of mirrors, essentially. And as she's in there, Susie is performing the lead in Folk for the first time. And the images coincide in terms of Susie's dancing is affecting the air around Olga in the opposing studio. As Susie is performing and she's throwing her arm out and she's dropping her head down and she's twisting her arm back, all of these actions have phantom actions that are happening to Olga. So Olga is getting thrown across the room. Her legs are being broken. Her arms are being broken. She's twisted. She's drooling. She urinates on herself. It was just so well done. Every time Susie threw her hand out or she did an action, the same action was repeated by Olga's character, but it was violent and it was horrific. And it was just such an interesting dichotomy. I really, really enjoyed it. My mouth was pretty much on the floor. The other scene that sticks out to me, when the company performs Folk for the first time in front of an audience, and we begin to see that it's actually ritualistic. The costumes that they're wearing, I know there was kind of a controversy about the costumes and people didn't really like them, but we had only seen stills up until, for Whitney and I, until last night. And the costumes, they're the red strappy hanging things. The costumes were perfect for this particular scene. And the whole film has a kind of hypnotic, almost spell casting feeling about it. Like it's almost like the whole film is a ritual, which is another reason why it reminds me of a story ballet, because story ballets tend to have that kind of contained, hypnotic feeling about them. Like a spell is being built around you, and then at the end it breaks. The red costumes really added to the hypnotic quality of the movement. I really appreciated that because I was a costume designer and I was a dancer, and to see those two things brought together in film, where it's really hard, for one, it's very hard to film dance in a way that makes any sense at all, because if it's not filming a performance straight on, a lot of movement gets lost, and as a viewer of dance on film, you don't really appreciate it. But then also a still shot of, people performing on a stage or in a room is not super interesting. So there's a fine line between what makes sense in filming dance scenes and what doesn't. And this scene, the costumes, the lighting, the cinematography, everything really came together for me. I didn't find this film to be particularly disturbing. I think a lot of people will, but I do think that part of the way that I was viewing the film, coming from a dance background, sort of pulled me out of the emotions in the film. And it was only as we were nearing the end of the film where my disturbance came from the fact that I hadn't been really disturbed during these scenes that are, quite honestly, they're pretty sickening, but I didn't find them disturbing until they were done. And then I was disturbed by the fact that I hadn't been disturbed previously. So it was like this weird after the fact self-reflection versus being upset by what I was seeing on the screen. I do watch a lot of horror, so I may be desensitized. Another thing that I found really interesting is that I felt like this was kind of an unflattering view of women. And I wasn't bothered by that. I felt like there were characters that embodied sort of terrible things about women, and the way that they walked and the way they chewed with their mouths open, and there was kind of a grotesque quality to some of the older witches in the coven. And that was juxtaposed with the kind of innocence and goodness and virtuousness of Susie. And so to me, it really represented two different types of women. And you really do see this sort of unflattering view of older, power-seeking, walk over anyone for their own means women. And I thought it was really interesting. And there's a scene where they're sort of fucking with two cops who come to the dance academy. And there's a bunch of witches, and they're fucking with these cops, and the cops are sort of zoned out, and they're taking their pants off and like playing with their dicks. And it did a good job of showing kind of there's two sides to everyone. And the men in the film are actually not portrayed as worthless or deserving of kind of shitty behavior, because the only men in the film there's three men in the film. There's two cops who are just trying to figure out what happened in the midst of this Lufthansa crisis. And there's a doctor who seems to genuinely care about and fear for his patients. Women can be shitty, and men can be shitty, and women can also be great, and men can also do the wrong thing while trying to do the right thing, and so can women. And so it felt more equal to me than it did one-sided. Even at the end, we find out that Susie has actually been Mother Suspiria this whole time, and she's coming into her power. And it seems to me that the ritual performed at the end is sort of the thing that allows her to regain her full power. She goes to the doctor, and in my opinion, offers him mercy in the sense that he's tortured by the fact that he couldn't help his wife escape the Hitler regime. And I think that he transfers some of that guilt onto his patient that we meet in the beginning, and he tries very desperately to save her. He can't save her. And in fact, she leads him to other women that lead to his downfall. And that's another reason why I didn't feel like it was too overtly feminine, too overtly filled with feminism, because there is an acknowledgement of Susie saying, you know, these women led to your downfall. They led to you feeling guilt and shame and fear. And I'm going to take that from you because you don't deserve it. Because she calls the women her children. She says, my children treated you unfairly. So she takes the memories of the women in his life so he won't have to feel guilt or shame anymore. And she offers this man mercy. There's definitely a kind of powerful element to these women in the sense that they are fully themselves, and you don't see any of them sort of talking to men or flirting with men. There's really no other men in this film, and they're just purely a collection of women who are working towards an artistic goal, seemingly. But it turns out that, in fact, part of that goal is actually really dark and fucked up. So it was like I said, it's like two sides to the same coin. I really enjoyed the relationship between Tilda Swinton's character and Dakota Johnson. I felt like it had a nice arc, and you got the sense that without anything really overtly being said, you got the sense that there was a kind of love and friendship growing there. And there's also, you know, coming from a dance background, they actually did this really subtle thing that I really enjoyed, where dancers are gluttons for punishment, and if you're not getting critiqued, you're not doing a good job. So there's a kind of firmness with Tilda Swinton's character that I enjoyed, because it is how company directors and choreographers are with the dancers that they care about, the dancers that they think are going to amount to something or have some kind of talent. They're hard on them. It's not an easy life, and that was kind of portrayed in a subtle way in the film, and I appreciated that. And generally, I really thought the film was it was just beautiful. It was really, really beautiful. And the score didn't bother me either, even though there were vocals in the score. That really didn't, I almost didn't even register them. So that's my take on Suspiria. Let us know what you guys think. I think that this movie is going to be pretty interesting in terms of how people feel about it and how divisive it's going to be. And I think a lot of people are going to love it, and I think more people are probably going to hate it because it's pretty gnarly. Let us know.